Welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephania Cox. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is urging China to respect the integrity of Hong Kong's laws. He offered a reminder of President Donald Trump's warning that it will be harder for Washington to make a deal with Beijing if violence ensues in the former British territory.
Speaking at the Detroit Economic Club, Pence explained that in order for the U.S. to make a deal with China, Beijing needs to honor its 1984 commitment to the Sino-British Joint Declaration. The agreement grants the city of Hong Kong lawful autonomy and allows freedoms not enjoyed in the rest of China, including the right to protest.
In fact, the Chinese Communist Party has used an arsenal of policies inconsistent with free and fair trade, policies like tariffs and quotas, currency manipulation, forced technology transfer, intellectual property theft, and industrial subsidies.
He confirmed the Trump administration will continue urging Beijing to act in a humanitarian manner. Yesterday, Trump linked trade talks with China to the ongoing Hong Kong situation.
I'd like to see Hong Kong worked out in a very humanitarian fashion. I hope President Xi can do it. He sure has the ability, I can tell you that from personal knowledge. He certainly has the ability to do it if he wants to.
However, China has repeatedly pushed back against U.S. involvement.
I think it would be very good for the trade deal that we're talking about.
Hong Kong is gearing up for more protests this week after hundreds of thousands of anti-government demonstrators braved heavy rain yesterday to peacefully rally.
More on Hong Kong. Over 1.7 million Hong Kongers joining a peaceful rally on Sunday, continuing their call for the government to engage with their demands. It marks the 11th consecutive week of protests. Despite pouring rain, crowds filling Victoria Park and spilling into nearby streets. They're condemning police violence during previous weeks of demonstrations. Protesters held signs with slogans including "Free Hong Kong" and "Democracy Now." They want to show they are peaceful and rational and will not give up on their 5 demands, which include a full withdrawal of the controversial extradition bill, retraction of calling the protests riots, the unconditional release of those arrested, an independent inquiry into events since June, and universal suffrage.
I think before accusing protesters for anything, try to look at the real problem and how the government how they turn a blind eye to us and to our demands.
We are expressing our views very peacefully, not violently, and this is what the government wants. This is what the government demands, and it is actually the best time for them to positively respond to our demand.
The campaign have the support, but the government doesn't. So we urge that Carrie Lam must listen to people's voices and implement the 5 demands.
The massive turnout, about 1.7 million people, say organizers, was also the calmest so far. Over the weekend, solidarity rallies were held in Vancouver, Toronto, London, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York City, and Sydney. Speaking to reporters yesterday, President Trump said he supports liberty and democracy in Hong Kong, warning Beijing that a violent crackdown would harm trade talks.
No, I think it would be very hard to deal if they do violence.
More protests are planned for the coming weeks, with various rallies organized by accountants, transport workers, high school students, and relatives of police officers. Reporting by Eleanor Tsao, NTD News. A parade scheduled for last Saturday in Toronto showing support for Hong Kong's protests was cancelled when a number of pro-Beijing counter-protesters showed up to interfere.
It was supposed to be another rally in March in support of the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement. Only this time, protesters faced anti-protesters. The group showed up and surrounded them with pro-China banners shouting "Hong Kong belongs to China."
I hope they understand what we are fighting for before they kind of yell at us.
Hong Kong supporters want the city's freedoms preserved, pleading for non-violence and accountability from Hong Kong's police and legislators.
one country, two systems. We deserve the democracy that we were promised to have. And I think we deserve the freedom that we used to have and we should continue to have.
Emotions flared as the two sides shouted at each other. In the end, organizers and police decided it would be safer to cancel the protest entirely.
Well, we are not because they are blocking a way out, and they are also attacking some of our volunteers and organizers just now. We are very angry at this kind of intimidation and harassment. So instead of marching, we'll stay here and stage a peaceful rally, showing our support to Hong Kong, and also to reiterate the reason why we are here today. This is Canada. We have the constitutional right to freedom of expression. No one can take that from all of us.
This red camp showed up to sabotage the protest just a few days after another event in Toronto, also denouncing the pro-democracy movement. That event was organized by Pro-Beijing groups. Its main speaker was a former Ontario minister accused of having ties to the Chinese government. And other Canadian cities with pro-Hong Kong rallies have met with similar disruptions, such as in Vancouver over the weekend.
We, as a Canadian, have to protect the freedom of speech because they violate our freedom of speech to crush our protest.
Pro-Beijing organizations have also run ads in Chinese publications condemning the Hong Kong protests. On Sunday, Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland condemned violence by Hong Kong police. This sparked a backlash from China's embassy, which warned that the Canadian side should be cautious in its words and deeds and to immediately stop meddling in Hong Kong affairs and China's internal affairs.
And on to social media. After reports of sponsored propaganda from Twitter from Chinese state-run media, Twitter disclosed and suspended hundreds of accounts for trying to sow political discord. NTD's Miguel Moreno has the story that started with a thread.
For 11 consecutive weeks, Hong Kongers have protested the extradition bill night and day, sometimes shielding themselves from heavy rain. It started as a protest against a now-suspended bill that would allow the Chinese regime to transfer Hong Kong's residents to face trial in China. It's now become a call for democracy. The protest has gained support from the United States and other countries, but online a user found that Twitter had been promoting articles from the Chinese state-run media Xinhua News. In one tweet, the agency describes the mostly peaceful protest as blatant violence. We spoke with a China analyst who explained that Xinhua News is the propaganda arm of the Chinese Communist Party.
The Western concept of media doesn't exist in China. So all the Xinhua News agency, everything are from the Communist Party.
Pinboard, the creator of the thread, said it wanted answers from Twitter, such as how much money it received from Xinhua and how many ads it has ran since the protest began. We contacted Twitter about the promoted tweets, and they told us that a widely circulated ad had been removed for inappropriate content. However, they did not specify which ad it was.
Any American company shouldn't endorse CCP's propaganda.
A few hours after we contacted the company, they released a statement saying that they're disclosing and suspending over 900 accounts for trying to deliberately sow political discord in Hong Kong by undermining the protest. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
The Department of Defense is testing new missile technology. Check out this slow-motion video from the Pentagon's West Coast missile test.
The DoD explained that the launch was a test of a ground-launched cruise missile. That type of missile had been previously banned by the now-defunct Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The U.S. announced its formal withdrawal from the treaty with Russia earlier this month, making the launch test possible. The Pentagon stressed the missile is designed to carry a conventional payload, not a nuclear one. According to defense officials, the test hit its target and will be used for future development.
There has been a shakeup in the leadership at the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Attorney General William Barr announced today a new director and deputy director.
Barr said the current acting director, Hugh Hurwitz, would be demoted. Hurwitz will return to being the assistant director of the Bureau's Reentry Services Division. The new director, Kathleen Hang Sawyer, served in the same role from 1992 to 2003. The new deputy director, Thomas Kane, had a number of leadership positions in the Bureau from 1977 to 2018, including as deputy director. This comes after Barr said he was appalled and angry at the Bureau's failure to secure Jeffrey Epstein while he was in prison. The wealthy financier was found dead in his jail cell on August 10th. His death was ruled a suicide by hanging. Barr ordered the FBI to investigate his death and said the inspector general planned to as well. Barr called this time a critical juncture for the Bureau. He said he was confident Sawyer and Kane would lead the Bureau with competence, skill, and resourcefulness. Holly Kellum, NTD News.
And the Trump administration confirmed today it will give U.S. companies 90 more days to end their business dealings with Chinese telecoms giant Huawei. NTD reporter Penny Zhou has the story.
Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross confirmed the extension on Fox Business today. American companies who have business with Huawei are mostly wireless carriers in rural areas who chooses Huawei mostly for its low price. They will have to find other suppliers by November. Ross also announced adding 46 more Huawei affiliate companies to the list of those barred from doing business with U.S. companies. He said this will make it harder for Huawei to get around the sanctions. Despite the reprieve, the Epoch Times China editor Kathy He said the move is consistent with President Trump's stance on Huawei.
Really just to get these any U.S. companies buying from Huawei just a bit more time to eventually stop. So
Trump affirmed his position yesterday.
So at this moment, it looks much more like we're not going to do business. I don't want to do business at all because it is a national security threat.
Experts have long raised concern about Huawei, which has close ties with the Chinese military. And a Chinese law requires that all companies in China must cooperate with the regime's intelligence authorities on request.
Potentially, the Chinese communist regime can use Huawei equipment to spy on Americans and also to use its telecommunications equipment to disrupt communications in times of potentially of war or conflict.
She said the ban could hit Huawei hard in the short term.
Huawei does rely a lot from U.S. Chip makers out there to build its components.
But in the long run,
there's a feeling that the Chinese Communist Party won't let it fail because it's just too big and too important for China.
Google has already reportedly cut off Huawei from using its Android operating system, as well as apps like Google Maps and Gmail. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
And from a European perspective, NTD sat down with the former head of Germany's domestic intelligence agency in an exclusive interview to discuss security concerns about Huawei and 5G networks.
Washington has repeatedly urged its European allies not to use Huawei to build next-generation networks, saying the company has possible ties to Chinese intelligence agencies. It also banned U.S. companies from selling components and technology to Huawei and 68 related companies in May, citing national security concerns. The former head of the German Federal Intelligence Service, Gerhard Schindler, was warning against Huawei as a national security risk back in 2011. Not only many former colleagues of mine, but also current heads of the intelligence services. As I know, we have the same concern about Huawei's involvement in 5G networks. Maassen said unlike any other private Western company, such as Siemens or Motorola, Huawei is a state-controlled company, masquerading as a private business. The fact is that as long as the Communist Party wants to spy on other countries and companies, Huawei can do it easily. This will make us incredibly vulnerable, in great danger, and we could be threatened. So in my opinion, we have to ban Huawei from entering the market. The Dutch federal government has already considered excluding Huawei's infrastructure and seeks to build new 5G mobile communications from other carriers. Reporting by Florian Godowitz and Charlotte Zhang, NTD News, Germany.
And back to the U.S. Should one state have the authority to decide who's eligible to run for president? One governor seems to be trying to do just that. NTD reporter Eileen Eng spoke with a lawyer in San Francisco who says that's unconstitutional.
Federal government, the federal constitution, and federal laws are supreme.
Harmeet Dillon, an attorney in San Francisco, explains the exclusive requirements to run for president.
And they are three requirements. You have to be 35 years old, a natural-born United States citizen, and have lived in the U.S. for 14 years. The president meets all of those criteria. The president has also met all ethics disclosure requirements required by the federal government.
California's Governor Gavin Newsom passed a bill on July 30th requiring a candidate running for president or governor to release tax information to be eligible to go on the state's primary ballot. Most people see it as a bill aiming to render President Trump ineligible for re-election. The President, Judicial Watch, and other legal groups, including Dillon's, have filed lawsuits seeking to overturn the new law. Represented among the plaintiffs are registered independent, Republican, and Democrat voters.
It is time sensitive because if under the current law, the candidates have to provide 5 years of their tax returns to the Secretary of State by the end of November, which will then be posted on the Secretary of State's website prior to the March election. And so we're seeking to have that law declared unconstitutional, and if we succeed, then the law will not go into effect.
A former prosecutor said a state doesn't have that kind of power.
I don't think states have the authority to add new conditions to the presidency. And if you strike the president from the ballot or a presidential candidate from the ballot because they don't fulfill your conditions, what you're basically doing is disenfranchising Californians. So I think it's blatantly unconstitutional.
What would Californians do if the law does go into effect? Dillon says it would discourage people from voting.
If Republican voters cannot turn out and vote for their preferred candidate for president, many of them will stay home and they will not be encouraged and motivated to go out and vote. This is going to have a negative impact on democracy overall. And even if the tables were turned and it was Republicans trying to suppress the Democratic vote, I would argue that's also unconstitutional.
One angel mom in Los Angeles said she would relocate.
I'll go to Arizona or another state, open a P.O. box address, and make my home in that state for that matter, but I will vote for President Trump.
Dillon says cheating either party in favor of their own is not American. So they are standing up for the rights of all citizens to vote for any properly qualified candidate. Eileen Ng, NTD News, California.
And there could have been 3 more mass shootings across the nation if these men weren't stopped by the police.
Police in Ohio finding an arsenal of assault rifles and large knives, a stockpile of ammunition, and even a gas mask. All this inside the home of James Reardon, a 20-year-old self-described white nationalist who they say made a threatening post about a mass shooting at a nearby Jewish community center. Reardon was on authorities' radar after making a post on Instagram showing a man firing off a gun, a local Jewish leader saying it had a disturbing caption. Police identified the Youngstown Jewish family community shooter as local white nationalist.
That kicked off a very intense investigation. He was charged initially right now with telephone communication harassment and aggravated menacing.
Police say Reardon attended the deadly 2017 rally in Charlottesville, as seen in this interview with National Geographic.
I want a homeland for white people, and I think every race should have a homeland for their own race.
His arrest, the latest in a string of mass shooting threats. In Florida, police body camera footage shows the arrest of Tristan Scott Wicks outside a Daytona Beach grocery store.
We're going to set your bond at no bond for the protection of the public, given the threat to kill at least 100 people.
The 25-year-old detained after police say his ex-girlfriend alerted them to a series of text messages detailing plans to commit mass shootings, writing chilling words like, "I want to open fire on a large crowd of people." And in Connecticut, police arresting 22-year-old Brandon Wagshaw last week after receiving a tip that he tried to buy a large-capacity rifle magazine out of state. He's been charged with illegal possession of large-capacity magazines.
There was some historical Facebook posts that indicated his interest in mass murder. That certainly raised an eyebrow. So the investigators worked very quickly and diligently.
Investigators also discovering numerous weapons, including a handgun and rifle, ammunition, body armor, and tactical gear inside his home. Emily Ho, NTD News.
An Iranian tanker is sailing through the Mediterranean toward Greece today after it was released from detention off Gibraltar. Tehran has warned that any U.S. move to seize the vessel again would have heavy consequences.
The Grace 1, renamed the Adrian Daria 1, left anchorage off Gibraltar around 11 p.m. last night. Tracking data shows the vessel heading to Greece today, scheduled to arrive there next Sunday. The data also reveals the ship is carrying about 2 million barrels of oil, valued at tens of millions of dollars. British Royal Marine suspected the tanker was carrying oil to Syria in violation of European Union sanctions when they seized it near Gibraltar on July 4th. A weeks-long standoff between Tehran and the West followed. Gibraltar, a British overseas territory, lifted the detention order on Thursday, but the next day, the U.S. issued a warrant for the tanker, the oil, and nearly $1 million. Washington says the tanker has links to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which it identifies as a terrorist organization. Gibraltar said on Sunday it was bound by EU law and so it couldn't comply with the United States' request to detain the tanker. Washington wants to reduce Iran's oil exports to zero and has reimposed sanctions that place heavy penalties on any breach, including asset freezes and being cut off from the U.S. financial system. The Adrian Daria 1, alongside other tankers, has since become a pawn in wider hostilities amid Iran's increasing its sensitive nuclear activities outside its agreed limits. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Since India announced the end of the special status of the Indian-administered state of Jammu and Kashmir, tensions between India and Pakistan have escalated. Experts believe that India is trying to resolve the issue bilaterally, while Pakistan is trying to bring in other countries to moderate.
The situation in Kashmir cooled down a little bit after India and Pakistan exchanged fire on the Kashmir border on the 17th, reportedly killing an Indian soldier. Escalating tensions between the nuclear-bearing countries is causing global concern. The United Nations Security Council had closed-door discussions on the issue last Friday, but has so far made no public statement about it. China supported Pakistan in urging the UN to discuss the issue, but the United States and Russia both want to resolve it with bilateral dialogue.
View from the power balance, India has stronger than Pakistan. If they negotiate bilaterally, this negotiation led by India, not Pakistan.
He said Pakistan wants a great power to help them negotiate. China and Pakistan regard each other as close strategic allies. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is the flagship project of China's Belt and Road Initiative. It passes through the Aksai-Chin area, which is to the east of Ladakh on the border with India. On August 8, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor Authority was approved by Pakistan's National Development Council. The new entity will be responsible for fast-tracking Belt and Road projects. This move is seen as part of an effort to gain more support from China over Kashmir. Reporting by Kitty Wan, NTD News.
Conservation is a way to protect our heritage, preserve our legacy, and ultimately save our past for generations to come. Those are some of the goals of an independent book conservator in New York City. NTD's Sherwin Rong visited Jeff Peachy at his studio in the Bronx.
I like old things, and I like them to look old, but just be preserved and function.
Jeff Peachy has been conserving books for more than 25 years.
What keeps me going is I want to keep all this context to the text.
Once a poet, he fell in love with books when he was putting together a book of poetry. For him, though, book conservation is more mechanical than artistic.
So I'm really interested in seeing those kind of granular nuts and bolts details about how they used a hammer to back the spine, or somebody had a mistake. All binders would beat the books like this on a big stone.
He said what amazes him the most are the skills that went into making these old books. Those skills have been lost, he said, because people don't make books on the scale they used to.
A well-made book can last a very long time, longer than all of us put together. And they're just, I mean, they're remarkable machines to me. And it's almost a perfect organic thing that a book can function thousands of years almost.
As a conservator, it is not about replacing the old with the new. It's about preserving the history of the books and their monetary value.
So the more we know about the material context of information, the more that's going to give us more information in the future.
Even though reading digitally is more popular now, he thinks that in the future, people will realize the value of books.
People are going to kind of rediscover just what a wonderful thing a book is as compared to reading digitally or some other way. So I think it will come back at some point.
Awaiting that day, he will continue with his work for as long as he can, and hoping that it will happen before all the old books are gone. Reporting by Xu Wenrong, NTD News, New York.
Alps officials are warning tourists about cows in the scenic region's green pastures.
With the rise of selfies and pictures on your phone, there have also been problems with cattle irritated by the extra attention of hikers. Officials have created signs reading, "Attention grazing animals, please keep distance. Dogs must be kept on a leash. Let go of the leash in case of danger."
First and foremost, the sign is aimed at the tourists, those on leisure, because first of all, the understanding of grazing livestock and the dangers isn't present.
In Austria, a legally binding code of conduct has been raised for hikers who visit its picturesque mountain pastures in response to the death of a German tourist who was trampled by cows. The incident, which took place in Tyrol in 2014, made national headlines.
And that's all for today's NTD News. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.